I get this question a lot. Melissa, is office hours or planning for peace, is it like recorded so that I could just listen to it again later? And here's the answer. No, it's not. And this is why. I really want that to be a safe space. I want that to be a space where you are free to say the things you need to say. You are free to be frustrated with your life, frustrated with your kids, frustrated with your partner, and let us help you pull it all back together and build it back up again. Because you can't do that if you're worried about somebody listening to it again later. So the answer is no. We don't record our live things anymore. Just for that, we really want to protect you. Welcome to our podcast, and I am so excited that I have Miss Deborah with us today. Really dive into the content for class 3, the child at 9. And again, our podcast is in 2 parts. So we'll have this first part where we'll talk, fairly surface about class 3, which is definitely enough to get you started. But if you want the deep stuff, you want to stick with us for our Patreon content and grab us over there. So first, let's introduce Miss Deborah. So thank you so much for joining me today, Deborah. I know you're in France right now, which is so awesome, but that's not where you normally live. You normally live in Florida, right?
True. Yes. But I was born in Minnesota, and that's where I raised my first 2 children many, many years ago. And I was introduced to Waldorf when they were young because I was looking for a school for my son. At that time, it was 1991. And I found a Waldorf school there and fell in love immediately with the beauty, with the goodness, with the striving for truth, but also for compassion and community. And so I really enjoy that part of Waldorf.
So did
So
you go to Minnesota? Did you take your son to Minnesota school
yeah,
or?
the Minnesota Waldorf School.
Oh, very
Yes.
cool. Very.
Yes. So that's where I started. And then I soon realized that something was stirring inside my soul, that I wanted to be more than just a parent at the Waldorf school. And I did homeschool my middle, which is now my middle daughter, in Waldorf as well. But I became a teacher, and I started in early childhood because I think that's where my children were, and I was familiar with that, and I was comfortable with that.
Common.
And
Often we gravitate toward that space first, right?
we do. We grow up with our children in some ways.
I agree.
Yes. Yes. So I was introduced to Waldorf and the pedagogy of Waldorf more deeply, and took my teacher training and raised my children through Waldorf, and ended up out on the East Coast so my daughter could go to a school out there, a high school out there. And then I had another child 17 years later, and she brought us to Florida. So I've been just exploring all the different ways that Waldorf can live in your home, and not just in a physical school, but just that community element, how to create that wherever you are. And that's been my challenge, and also that has been a gift.
Absolutely. And it is definitely a challenge and a gift because, like, from my perspective where I am, I've spent the last 20 years creating co-ops and trying to keep people together so that we have that community. Because when I started, I was in Idaho, there was no Waldorf school. There was no
Right.
Waldorf school anywhere. And so that space was a space we definitely had to create where you like moved to the Waldorf school. And I know so many families do that. They'll pick up and go to where there's a Waldorf high school or move closer to a school. It really was not an option for me at the time. So, but I can really appreciate that space of really wanting that community and wanting to like cultivate that for yourself and for our
Mhm.
children, because we're so important in that space too. I think often parents say, I don't think I can do it without a community. Well, you have to grow one if there's not one near you.
That's right.
And it's actually like, while keeping a community going can be hard, starting one is often not hard. You can really find one other mom, 2 other moms, and then that's where it begins. It really, so many Waldorf schools, I mean, most of them started from 1 or 2 parents that really got together and then started gathering more and more people. So that's really the way beautiful communities get started. Don't you do some other things though too? I know you're in the CBD business now, and I have really appreciated your CBD with the purity content. It's really great stuff. It's really great
Yes.
stuff.
So at one point in my life, probably 4 years ago, my father had died, and I just was reflecting on everything deeply. You know how profound those moments in our biography can
So
be.
stories.
And I wanted to connect with my two adult children more. I lived in a different state, and I just wanted to connect with them. So I connected with my daughter by getting on the keto diet and lost 25 pounds. And so she and I had that closeness. We talked more about it. And then with my son, we created a CBD business at our farm in Wisconsin, because I have a farm. I have some land up there. It's the All in All Ranch. And that was something that we do together now. And it just really deepened our relationship and the relationship with the land, which was just we weren't using that space. We were enjoying it when we visited, but we weren't really using that space. And it's such good soil, and it's so pure. And my son, being a Waldorf student when he was young, just understands the the energy of the earth and how to
Right.
work with soil, and listening to the plants and observing nature and observing the weather and all of that. So he has a gift with that. And our plants just are phenomenal. They're amazing.
That's beautiful. So does he live there in Wisconsin and take care of your things on that space?
He goes up there. He's not far from the actual farm.
That's
Yes.
lovely. That is really lovely. That makes it a family space, when you're
Yes.
bringing all of those pieces together. So that's lovely. I am so glad that we have you with us today, because you are a wealth of knowledge in so many ways. But let's dive in. Let's dive into this space. So who is ready for class 3?
Well, so the way that Waldorf works is that this content of each grade is specifically designed for the children that are at that age. So it's developmental, and it's very important that the children receive it when the time is right, because
Right.
then they're ripe for it, then they're ready for it, then it resonates within their soul, within their being. So it's not
And
just
it's not just stories, right? It's not just content. It's
stories. No,
actually stuff that feeds their soul.
feeds their soul. So for third grade in particular, it's a time when the children step out that door of their home, that space that they've been familiar with, into this world, and they become aware of everything that's around them in a new way. They have a new sense of awareness, and they learn to do more things for themselves. So third grade, we do a lot with making shelters, with making food, with clothing, and working with wool, and just everything that one needs to know about their life on Earth.
Right?
And that,
They learn where their food is coming
yes,
from.
where the
Like
farming, yes,
all of it.
yes.
It's such a beautiful space, because they are so much more awake than they were just a year ago. Like so much more awake. And I think when I look at children, when we ran our co-op in San Diego, we'd have them all broken into grade or to classes, and you could tell the ones that were 8 and they're almost to that space where they're ready for the 9-year stuff. Then you get to still see the ones that were so dreamy just months before. They're just those that are just not ready. So if we have a parent that has a child that is 8 going on 9, what would you say if they're still in that really dreamy space? Would you say, let's get started anyway?
No,
Or
I
would
would,
you have
yeah.
them wait a little bit? Maybe often I'll tell parents, you can look at the curriculum and you could move the math blocks before some of that story content. You could move some farming stuff before that like the Old Testament story content. Move those blocks around until you start to see them be ready.
Right. Well, it's like stepping stones too. So the second grade curriculum really meets that child of 8 years old. And they need to have that experience in the world around them that reflects what's happening within them. So with the second grade, they're really oscillating between the fables and the saints, and without that experience, without exercising that part of themselves and moving right into that next level, they're missing out on something. They're missing out on something wonderful. They're missing out on understanding themselves better and understanding their world better.
I agree so much. We don't, I often parents come to me and ask me, what can I skip? And I go, nothing. Let's see. What do you know? Like, where can we shave? But there are certain pieces we really want to make sure that they get. What about the parent that comes and maybe they're a fourth grade parent? Would you recommend that they go back and do the story content for class 3 or just keep walking?
Well, okay. So here's the beautiful thing about class 3. So you have farming, you have a lot of things that you can do all the way through. You can bring your first grade child to
Right.
the and get their hands dirty, and just through their experience, they're learning about it. Fourth grade, that's just totally fine. There are so many wonderful things about third grade that can sort of continue as they get older. I personally would look at the child to see developmentally where they are at, because some children, they're just still young, and why do we want to push them? Maybe we don't know. We don't really know what their journey is always. We just have to trust ourselves in our decision making and discernment, and then just look. There are physical things we can look at to see if a child is ready for their particular grade. There's a zone with the children that, like, well, maybe they fall in that gray range, where maybe they should just have another year or just wait a little bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think if I could impart anything to parents, it is don't be afraid to just say, you know what, maybe we stepped too fast. Let's back up. Or maybe we still need to be in this space. Let's hang on to it a little bit longer. Because, at home, and it's different than in the classroom, but at home, we have the opportunity to do that. We have the
Yes,
opportunity to say, hey, I could put the brakes on this a little bit. And
yes,
I think, we get so wrapped up in what our society thinks about, oh no, you're holding your child back. No, we're not holding them back. We're actually like keeping them where they need to be for a little bit longer, and then walking with them. And I think that we get so hung up on it as a society. It just cracks me up. And it cracks me up, I think, because as adults, I don't go, hey, Deborah, what reading level are you at?
right.
Like, right? Like we don't have those conversations as adults. We don't ask each other how far we went in math.
Mhm.
That's not so I think we have to really, and a lot of it I know comes from my 20 plus years of homeschooling, of me being like, I just don't care. What I care about is that relationship with the child, their
Yes,
relationship with the content, and them being whole humans as we walk forward.
yes,
Me not
yes,
pushing or holding back, but being able to say, oh, well, gosh, a month ago when I was planning this, I thought we needed to stay here, but now I'm seeing all these other things develop. So I'm going to take today and I'm going to plan out that next block so that we can walk forward. That's just part of this journey of like really being able to be flexible with our children. And, I know it's a little bit different when they're in the classroom or even at seasons of 7 where, we have to teach to the capacities of the entire class. But what's interesting about that too is they often will like come along with everybody else. Don't you think?
yes,
Like they'll
yes.
they'll they'll become part of that group, and when they become part of the group, it just pulls their little spirits right along with them.
That's right. Yes.
Good, very good. So I'm thinking we talked about age. So we're talking about the child that is 9 or nearly 9.
Right.
And so that's not 8 in 1 month. That's not even 8 in 4 months. It's like 9 or nearly 9. So I like our cutoff is usually like March 31, which I know is early for a lot of people, but I've never in the 15 plus years that I have been coaching families, I have never had somebody come back to me and say, I'm so sorry I waited. Never.
Right,
I
right,
have had people come to me and say, I wish I had listened to you. I wish
right.
I wish I had listened to you instead of listening to my mother-in-law or society. I wish because they'll message me and the content will feel off and I'll say, well, are we properly placed? Oh, remember we had this talk 3 months ago and you said you were going to go ahead anyway. And I recommended that you step back. So maybe it's okay to step back and, really just sort of look at who your child is and where they are developmentally. And that's like such a spiritual path as a parent. We really have to look at ourselves,
Yes,
right?
that's right. And why are we in a hurry? Like, why? What is the purpose? What are we hoping to achieve? Is it competition? Is it, to fulfill some sense of like accomplishment or achievement in your parenting? Like, I don't know. I just think
I
it's a
agree.
gift.
I think that those
Yeah,
things seep in though, right? Like again, I
you.
think it's like, are we led by the spirit or are we led by society and culture? And
Right,
when we make that distinction with all of our decisions, then we truly become conscious parents. When,
right,
and when we can stand up to Aunt Susie and say, sorry, Aunt Susie, this is just what we're doing.
right.
I have on more than one occasion, and I know my mom's been like trying to hide her face when we've been at family functions. And I'll just say, hey, you know what? You had your opportunity to raise your children. I'm going to
Yep,
take the opportunity to raise mine. And you can say that and just be super sweet and friendly. And they wonder, wait, what did she just say? And then usually we can stop having that conversation and talk about the weather or something else. But I think it is that space of really becoming solid in who you are as a parent and solid and that solid space doesn't mean you don't change your mind. Doesn't mean you don't go, gosh, I think I took a misstep here. I'm going to pull back because
right.
I think intention is everything with the spirit. And so the spirit
Yes.
comes along and fixes those pieces and then we can move forward. So let's switch to the general content for class 3.
Okay.
So we talked about farming a little bit and I love this space because when we did, I've done farming 5 times now with my
Yeah.
children. When we did it this last time, we actually talked about like dairy alternatives. And I had never done that before, even though
Yeah.
we had times in our parenting where we were dairy free. We talked about dairy alternatives this time, and that was an interesting path as well. Like really understanding more pieces of farming.
Very interesting. Well, I don't know. I haven't done that yet, but I have taken my students, whether virtually or in person, to visit the cows and milk the cows and just
Um,
see how each animal at a farm and everybody plays a part. And just like in your home, everybody plays a part to your home economy and contributes something. Everybody has this gift. So, what is the gift of the cow besides milk? What is the cow? Who is this cow? The archetype of the cow, and the horse, and the sheep, and they give these physical gifts, but they also have a purpose and a role in a farm community.
right.
So with that and of course then the manure for the soil and enriching that soil and just really seeing everything that goes into creating food, creating the vegetables, creating the soy to make the soy milk,
All the things, right? It's so
all the
interesting too.
things.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah. And then just the relationship between not just the weather and the sun, but also the moon and the stars. Like there are forces out there that really influence the growth of plants. And I
Right.
think science is catching up with this.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. How much of that do you bring to the third grader? Because I know that like horticulture is like part of the curriculum all the way through. What pieces would you bring to a third grader versus a sixth grader?
Well, I think that I would bring a little bit about time because time is very, very important in the third grade, and it's important with farming and the farmer's
Right,
almanac,
absolutely.
and even in so we studied the Old Testament, not study. We hear stories of the Hebrew people and the
Right.
Old Testament. So in Ecclesiastes, you have that beautiful verse about
Right.
there is a time for everything, and I think that is good for the children to know. They don't need to know like the biodynamic calendar, but as a teacher, one could say, well, this is a better time to plant and this is a better time to harvest. And
Absolutely.
just
That should be coming like aware to you as you're going to the farmer's market, planting your own garden,
yes.
even if you're just planting flowers. Or why is grandma plant if you don't plant? Because I kill things. So, why is grandma planting right now? I always
Yeah.
tell people I can grow children really well. I cannot grow plants. Every time we teach third grade, my husband's like, oh, are you about to murder some more plants? Because I don't know what it is. I have many talents. That is not one of them, but that's okay because I think that it made me have to look at other ways for us to really get it in there, or I was just going to show my children how to kill plants. So, we went to farms, we talked about that. And I think that's so important because organically that's going to come up. Well, why are they planting now? Well,
Mhm.
there's no snow on the ground. It's warmer. Can you feel the weather, right? It makes them, because they're already super aware of what's going on around them. You're almost just like leading them to this space of their own conclusions and seeing
Yeah.
how the farm works. You said something so beautiful. You said the farm life, there are all these things that have to work together. And I think for the 9-year-old that wants to fight often about everything, you can
Mhm.
have this beautiful parenting conversation of, remember when we went to the farm and
Mhm.
the farmer had a job and his wife did something different and the farmhand did something different and Susie made sure that all the chickens were fed. Like, remember how all those people work together? Well, in our house, we all have to work together.
That's
And
right.
it really helps wake them up in a way that's not punitive.
Yeah.
And they're in a spot of starting to think more. And they might not be happy about it when you have the conversation, but they're going to take it in and it's going to sit with them much, much more than if you yell at them about being kind to their sibling.
That's right. That's right.
So
Yeah.
not that I haven't ever done that, but it's a space of
Yes.
like seeing the natural lessons where you can find them. And I think that that's really beautiful space. So if farming in class 3, what other things would you say are the most important pieces to cover in class 3?
Well, so I think shelters, building shelters and having the shelter block is very important in class 3. It fits in so well with the stories of the Hebrew people,
Right.
where, yep, there was a lot of traveling and a lot of shelters that had to be made and taken down, and then you go somewhere else and you put it up, and it has to do with like
Yeah,
living
for
on the
many years. Like, can you
for
imagine?
many, many years, many years. So that is, I think that one's really a great one. The kids in third grade really, really love that. And it can be more than just, it's forts. Like they love to make forts. It's such a great thing for third graders to do. And just like you said, if you don't make a sound structure, it's going to fall down. You're not going to stay dry when it rains. And so they really have to think in a way that maybe they haven't thought about before,
Absolutely.
their relationship with the elements in their world.
Absolutely. We built a sukkah one year.
Yeah.
We built it and our driveway had just a slight slant. And we were in San Diego and we built it and it was beautiful. And we had eaten out there and we were doing school out there. And then there was a storm and
Yeah.
it gave us this opportunity to ask ourselves, hey, what did we do wrong in building it? Like, what could we have done different
Right.
to help it stand? Of course it was just 2x4s, but still, like, what could we have done different? So it's not like San Diego's tornado weather. What could we have done different that would have helped it not fall in the wind? And so you're right, it gives you this opportunity to really sort of look at, all right, well, what would happen if our house was built that way? What would happen? How do we build a sound structure? Because one of the things that I know Steiner says is like he wants children of this age to truly understand how a house is built, like what goes into it,
Right.
into building it, what goes into like how does the light turn on? like this piece of, because they're so inquisitive, we want to get them interested in things that are appropriate versus things that are not. So, we had a great conversation yesterday, and my daughter's about to be 12, but she's like, I know we talked about the poles taking the electricity to the house. She said, but there's no poles because, so many communities now have
Right.
buried poles. So we had to have this conversation about, well, now it's not so much about the poles. Everything is buried, and everything is under there. Everything is underground. Like, you've got, of course, your water has always been underground, but your cable is underground now. Your electricity
Right.
is underground. All of those pieces are totally underground now. And, we really have to look at, like, how are things different. That was a big conversation, but I think it's so fun for them to really understand what happens when you flush the toilet. Like,
Right. Where does it go? It
where
just
does it
doesn't
go? Where
disappear.
does it come from? How does the water get
Yes.
into your house? So you take
Yes.
a trip to the water treatment plant, or to the water tower where your community gets water. So I think it's fun to sort of open those capacities with them. You
That's
mentioned
right.
Hebrews, so let's talk about the Hebrews, because what's lovely, I think, beyond just the Hebrew stories matching the 9-year-old, these were an agrarian people. These were
Yeah.
farming people.
Yeah.
So many of their festivals have something to do with the farming year. And so you can really look at it from, that perspective when you're bringing these stories, because they were really all dependent on what they grew. So talk about
Yes.
that.
So it just reminds me, going back to this measuring of time. So third grade does a lot with measuring. So you could look at the rhythm of the year as a measurement through the festivals. Like, that's measuring the year from festival to festival, because we have our units of measurement that we all agree on. And the third grade students do learn about that, of course, but we start with things like measuring. I use the smile. They would measure their smile with a string. And how many smiles does it take from your desk to the door, your bed to the door? And then they measure it with from the string that they created from their own smile. So I think with the Hebrew people, a lot of that is a lot was calculating in that way too. So it all fits together. It's so beautiful. Oh, like the cubits and the Noah's Ark, measuring that, and what
It's
is a
so
cubit?
fun. I love measuring the arc. I'm like, woohoo, I got third grade again. We're gonna go measure the arc. And my kids are like,
Yes,
lady is so
walk it out.
I love it. We've measured the arc in parks. We measured the arc in
Yes,
snow. We've measured the arc on the beach. It is just such a fun space to really, because they really don't. I don't think when you're discussing like the size in cubits, they're like, oh yeah, right, whatever, mom. But once you measure it, it becomes
yes.
a completely different thing. We made this stick that was like 3 cubits long, so it made it a little bit easier to measure the arc.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it gets them really into the space as a living lesson. Then you're having this discussion about, well, how do you put all the animals of the world? Well, then you have the discussion about, like, okay, wait, well, it's not all the species of cats. It was probably just one species of cat. It was
Right.
probably just one species of dog. So then you're having this deeper, I find it more of a scientific conversation that's just perfect for the 9-year-old. It's just
Right.
enough science. So when people say to me, so where do you have science in the class 3 curriculum? I go, oh, well, in the Old Testament. And they go, what? Like, they don't like, they can't like connect those dots until I explain, well, we're having a conversation about genus and phylum and, family names and those kinds of things, because you have to, in order to understand what actually was in the ark.
Right. Yes.
What would you say, just lightly, because we're going to talk more about this in our other section, what would you say just lightly for the parent who says, I can't bring the Old Testament to my child?
Well, I think that is a good question for a parent to explore. Like, what is it inside oneself? Where is that resistance? And in Waldorf education, we have all the stories. And I've had parents ask me, well, do you teach Norse myths as if they're real? That's fourth grade. Yes, I do. I teach it all. I teach it all with
All part of
this.
our human memory.
Right. It's all a part of our human biography, our evolution of humanity. And there is truth in all of these stories. So we get hung up on what we've been told. It's kind of the same thing like what we were talking about earlier. And I would just, if I were a parent that had those questions, I would explore inwardly, where are my hangups, and seek the value in what's being brought. Like, go beyond
Mhm.
your whatever you think are your connotations of what this or that means, and try and find the value in everything.
I agree, because it's not a religion lesson. It's a lesson about the people and their stories. And so, I find I often will talk to people about, like, the first time I taught them, I was a practicing pagan, and I just said, all right, I'm going to trust Steiner. I walked forward anyway.
Right. Right.
I think it's the space of, like, do you trust the curriculum, and can you just walk forward, and just, if you've had a bad experience with them, just treat them as stories. And you're not telling every single story in the Old Testament. You're going to pick certain ones. I really like Jacob Strait's books, because they lay
Yeah,
out some beautiful, plus he's an amazing storyteller.
absolutely.
So, or pick a children's Bible, something that is going to be on their developmental level, and
Right.
try to separate yourself and just see them as stories. I think that's such an easier way to go about it. So, any other thoughts as we close up the section and go on to our deeper section?
Well, I just wanted to say one more thing about that with the Old Testament stories. So we start with the creation, which is just so beautiful. And it's a great way to begin the year, just delving into the colors of creation and the days and all of that. But the reason why the Old Testament stories are so perfect for the third grade child, is the 9-year-old child, is that there, after creation, there is that fall from paradise. So it's a fall from this oneness, with Adam and Eve and in the Garden of Eden. And so they then become aware of so much more. They've eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And that's exactly where the 9-year-old child is at.
Absolutely. They dip their toe into this goodness place, and then they're like, but I'm also going to dip my toe into this naughty space sometimes. So that night, the stories just really support that dichotomy of what's going on in their own
Right.
soul and their own experience. And really, and it's funny, because as a mother of 5, I've seen it, like, really strong in some children, and then had an easy time with other children. And so it shows, like, their temperament shows up more, and you really get to sort of see who they are. And I really love the way the Class 3 curriculum really touches the children of 9 exactly where they need to be touched, and really
Right.
have this soul level space. And so, thank you so much for talking to me about this. We're going
Sure.
to
Yep.
close up this section. And if you want more information, if you want some deeper stuff, we're going to talk more about these stories. We're going to talk more about how they reach the children, and more about, our own personal experiences in our Patreon version. So please join us over there. And we are so excited that you came today, and we will see you in the next podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Deborah, so much for joining us.
What is our Thinking, Feeling, Willing program? It is your roadmap to a successful Waldorf homeschool journey. Gain the confidence you need to be the teacher your child wants and transform your homeschool experience.